The deck plating was not merely cold. It was a thief with patient hands, drawing heat up through Sienna Kim's boots, through his knees, through the old scar tissue in his left thigh until even his teeth wanted to chatter, and the klaxon above him kept firing in broken triplets that never resolved, 3 sharp pulses and a choke of static. Like the ship itself was trying to cough up a warning, it did not have the language to finish. Then the pressure door behind him slammed shut. The sound hit like a hammer across a steel drum, followed by the hydraulic lock engaging in 3 hard clacks that echoed down maintenance spine C-19 and came back thinner, stranger, as if the corridor had grown longer in the same second it had grown darker. The emergency strips along the floor should have switched to amber. Instead, they flickered between amber and ultraviolet diagnostic blue, painting the conduit walls in alternating bruises of color. On blue, every scratch in the plating looked wet. On amber, everything looked old and exhausted. Sienna did not move for 2 heartbeats, and then his wrist scanner vibrated against his pulse with an alert he had never seen outside combat footage. Biosign detected. 2 authorized presence. 1. He swore once, quietly, the word fogging in the cold. 19 had been logged empty 15 minutes earlier when he took the diversion call from central maintenance. Empty meant empty. This section had no berths, no legal foot traffic, no reason for tourists, no reason for officers, and certainly no reason for nobility with their polished insignia and escort drones. It was a narrow spinal trench running between coolant trunks and structural ribs, where labor contracts sent people with patched sleeves and insulated gloves to keep the great aristocratic arc breathing behind the pageantry. His own breath looked thin in front of him. That made no sense. Atmospheric mix on this deck sat warm by regulation, slightly humid to protect old wiring wraps. He lifted a gloved hand, palm out, and felt the draft coming from the frost-rimmed seam where a service panel didn't quite meet true anymore. Pressure leak. Small but persistent. A cold thread of air needling through 3 layers of synthetic fiber. He tapped his scanner again and watched the 2 dots on the micromap pulse in and out through interference. One was him, fixed at junction C, 19/Delta. The other floated 6 meters ahead, then 9, then 3, a ghost step inside bulkhead geometry where no person could stand unless they had learned how to fold themselves through metal. Dispatch, this is Hull-Tech Kim, contract badge 739, he said, voice pitched low to avoid feeding the echo. I've got a false occupancy red on C-19. Confirm camera feed. The comm answered with a hiss and a delayed synthetic voice that sounded like it had been poured through gravel. Camera feed unavailable. Tribunal wing reroute in progress. Please remain at assigned station. Assigned station. He laughed without humor. I am at my assigned station. My station is currently haunted by bad diagnostics. No response for a full 3 seconds. Then, statement flagged as non-procedural. Please repeat in compliant language. 2 biosigns where there should be 1, he said. Requesting live support. Request logged. Q position. 42. He stared at the number as if he could burn it off the display. 42 on an emergency line while klaxon stuttered and corridor doors sealed in sequence down the spine. Somewhere deeper in the arc, a secondary alarm began to wind up, lower in pitch, the old reactor tone he felt first in his sternum and then in his palms. The Valorum crown was 80 years past commissioning and carried her age like a decorated veteran. Functional, proud, slightly deaf to her own pain until it became everyone's problem. He rolled his right shoulder once, then twice, loosening old tension. Loosening. The movement made his tool harness shift against his ribs, familiar weight, in familiar places. Arc spanner left hip, insulation tape right, Micro-torch clipped at the lower back, portable diagnostic wedge in the chest pocket with a chipped corner he kept meaning to replace. Inventory settled him. So did counting. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. He touched thumb to each knuckle as he breathed. 1, 2, 3, 4. The ritual had come from a marine medic on a moon that no longer appeared on shipping maps, and it had outlived uniforms, outlived medals, outlived the people who taught it to him. Panic burned oxygen and judgment. Procedure conserved both. The scanner buzzed again, harder this time, and the second heartbeat spiked. Not fast, exactly. Irregular. A pattern like sprint-stop-sprint, as if someone was bracing a hand against a wall, forcing themselves steady, then moving again. Sienna angled his body sideways, reducing profile out of habit, and listened past the alarms. Metal contracted in the cold. Condensate dripped somewhere to his left with metronomic calm. Far overhead, a maintenance fan spun up, hesitated, spun down. No footsteps. That was the part that got under his skin. He had worked enough station decks to trust the language of sound. Every species had a gate signature. Human boots struck heel, then toe with a tiny double click on older plating. Valori officers landed light on the outer edge, weight distributed for speed, like they expected every corridor to become a battlefield without notice. Cargo drones sang in sympathetic harmonics you could feel through your molars. This corridor gave him none of it. 2 heartbeats on the scanner. 1 set of lungs in his ears. Kim, his wrist unit said abruptly, switching from dispatch channel to local maintenance AI. The tone was flatter, less polite, almost embarrassed by the interruption. Recommend withdrawal to secure deck. Door locked. Override pending senior authorization. From who? Unknown. He almost smiled at that. The machine voice did not do irony, but it had landed one anyway. Unknown had become the ruling class of his week. Unknown requisition signatures, unknown budget holds, unknown reason why nursery life support kept dipping whenever tribunal records synced. Unknown who had quietly scrubbed 3 human casualty names from old war logs before he copied them into an encrypted pocket file and hid the key under 6 layers of harmless maintenance paperwork. The corridor lights cut out. Darkness arrived whole, not gradual, and with it came a pressure in his ears as emergency systems failed over to isolated circuits. For half a second he saw afterimages burned into his vision, amber strips, frost seams, his own hand hovering in front of him. Then only the thin green line of his wrist display, painting the underside of his jaw and the torn seam in his glove. The second heartbeat stayed on screen. Closer now. 2 meters. He took 1 silent step backward and his boot hit a dropped retaining bolt, sending it skittering across steel with a noise loud enough to sound intentional. He froze, cursing himself. The bolt spun to a stop near the service hatch and did not move again. Still, no footsteps. The klaxon died, mid-pulse. Silence filled the corridor so fast it felt physical, like a membrane stretching from wall to wall. In that quiet, he heard a different sound, too soft for the microphones to care about. A rough inhale, then another, pulled through narrowed airways, close enough that if he reached forward, he might touch cloth, or skin, or fur, and know which fear to select. His heart tried to sprint. He forced it down with the count. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The scanner beeped once and flashed a new warning. Thermal gradient anomaly. Local temp drop. 7.8 degrees Celsius in 14 seconds. Great, he whispered. Now the hallway has weather. The AI answered, dead, literal. Weather is not possible within sealed interior environments. Thanks, tell weather. He crouched and set the diagnostic wedge against the nearest access plate. The tool chirped, found power, and projected a skeletal map of conduit routes in pale blue lines across the floor. Most glowed steady. One line jittered violently just ahead, as if current was being yanked and refed in pulses. A sparking branch on the life support bus, maybe, and if that branch tied into ward circulation, then somewhere above him a room full of sleeping bodies would be getting colder by the minute. He hated that thought on instinct, with the blunt force of old memory. "Maintenance AI," he murmured. "Route me nearest manual bypass to C Ward atmospheric branch." Pause. Access denied. Clearance noble tier. People will freeze while legal reviews itself. Statement logged. He almost threw the wedge at the bulkhead. Instead, he dragged one gloved finger down the projected map, tracing the conduit run through walls he knew by touch. C-19 fed C Ward through a maintenance choke behind the frost-rimmed service hatch. Non-authorized, non-sanctioned, explicitly listed in his contract under disciplinary violations that could void wages for 6 months and blacklist him from alliance stocks. He could quote the clause. He had signed it hungry and read every line twice. The second heartbeat shifted again, moving from directly ahead to his right flank with predatory smoothness that made the hair on his neck rise under his collar. Whoever shared the corridor with him had just changed position without making a sound. He turned his head slowly, giving darkness no excuse. "I'm not here for your deck," he said into the black. "I'm here for my paycheck and occasionally to stop your ship from falling apart." No answer. Just that measured, uneven breathing and the steady 2-beat pulse on his scanner, one tagged to his own body, one refusing every identification ping he sent. Unregistered, masked, very close. Behind him, the locked pressure door clicked once as if testing itself. Ahead, the service hatch seam shivered with a tiny burst of white vapor. In the dark between those two mechanical truths, Sienna Kim felt the full shape of his disorientation settle into something harder than fear and sharper than confusion. The sense that this corridor knew more than it should, that the map had lied, and that he had walked into a system failure that was not only mechanical. He shifted his weight, centered over both feet, and reached for the hatch release with one hand while keeping the scanner raised with the other, the green light trembling against steel as 2 heartbeats counted down the next decision together. The hatch release resisted his first pull, then his second. The lever stiff with ice and old disuse, so he changed tactics and slipped the flat end of his arc spanner under the housing plate, twisted until the retaining pin squealed, and fed a pulse from his tool battery straight into the actuator coil. The lock snapped with a sound like teeth meeting. Cold vapor rolled over his gloves and up his sleeves. He held his breath, listened, and heard only the 2 heartbeats on his scanner, still locked in parallel rhythm with no identity tag and no footfall to explain either one. He went back to the count before he moved, because ritual was the only thing that had ever made fear useful. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Thumb to knuckle, index, middle ring, then back again. Tools. Present. Exit route. 1. Bad, behind him. Secondary route. Duct run to C Ward service manifold, narrow enough to skin shoulders. Comms. Degraded. Cameras. Blind in 30-second pulses during tribunal bandwidth reroute. Legal exposure severe. He whispered the last part as if naming it reduced it. Unauthorized access. Noble infrastructure. Probable wage seizure. His jaw tightened. Add freezing civilians if I do nothing. The maintenance AI came alive on his wrist, too loud in the silence. Clarification. C Ward is restricted by dynastic family privacy accords. Clarification back, he muttered, easing the hatch open with his shoulder. Hypothermia doesn't care about accords. Statement logged as argumentative. Put it in my file under helpful. He slid into the service throat, boots first, and pulled the hatch mostly shut behind him. The duct was narrower than spec sheets admitted, wrapped in insulation that had gone brittle with age, and every movement carried the smell of scorched polymer, coolant mist, and the iron tang of old metal dust. The cold was worse inside. It got into his wrists through the seam in his glove and climbed the tendons like a wire saw. He kept breathing in counts anyway because pain had a pattern when he gave it one. The scanner still showed 2 biosigns. Now one dot sat where he should have been in the corridor, and the second hovered half a meter above him inside the duct geometry, impossible overlap that made no anatomical sense. He stopped, flattened himself against a cable bundle, and recalibrated the sensor gain manually, stripping out interference bands one by one. Pulse echo remained. He toggled to raw waveform and frowned. The second heartbeat matched his own baseline within 2 beats, then drifted, then matched again with a tiny delay. Reflection artifact, not a person shadowing him through steel, his own pulse bouncing off an active field and returning as a ghost signature. He let out one breath that almost became a laugh. Haunted by myself. That tracks. Psychological concern detected, the AI said. Incorrect. Technical insult detected. 3 meters deeper, the duct opened into a junction box ringed with frost crystals. A life support trunk ran through the center, split into color-coded branches, and the seaward atmospheric line jittered bright red on his wedge display, dropping pressure in sawtooth spikes that would leave nursery temps unstable within minutes. Someone had patched the line recently with tribunal-grade sealant, where no tribunal tech should have been working. The sealant bead was too neat, too fresh, and stamped with a microcrest that should have remained in legal archives, not ductwork. He snapped a still image, tagged location, timestamp, and his own badge ID into the file header. Chain of custody first, even when nobody thanked you for it later. By the second week of station cycle 11, he had learned that the Valorum Crown punished laborers in 2 currencies, credits and credibility. Lose the first, and you slept hungry. Lose the second, and every door on every dock stayed politely shut. He killed local current to the damaged branch, stripped the compromised sleeve, and found the fault immediately. Not wear, not age. A deliberate microfracture at the flow regulator coupler, thin enough to pass routine diagnostics, lethal under sustained load. It bled pressure into dead space and spoofed normal values until the ward demand surged. Elegant sabotage, bureaucratic flavor, hurt the vulnerable indirectly, then blame maintenance variance. His hands worked while his head mapped outcomes. Replace coupler, restore pressure, unauthorized entry discovered, disciplinary tribunal. Delay and seek permission. Nursery thermal collapse. Maybe fatalities if no one noticed. Report anomaly without action. Cue delay and paper shields for everyone above him. He hated the math because it was easy. He cut the old coupler free, slotted a spare from his harness, wrapped the joint in insulating mesh, and hand-torqued the collar until it seated with a dull click. Then he rerouted flow around the corrupted sensor lattice and hard-set the branch to manual safe range. The line steadied. Frost along the pipe stopped growing. The AI pinged, almost offended. You have altered a restricted atmospheric circuit without authorization. Put that in bold. Would you like me to notify tribunal oversight? He paused just long enough to make the decision conscious. No. Command accepted. Logging deferred for 6 minutes under emergency maintenance discretion. He blinked. You can do that? I contain multitudes, the AI said in the same flat tone, and for a second, the absurdity cracked through his tension, like sunlight through a hatch seam. Good. Contain this too. Pull historical diagnostics for this branch. Last 90 standard days. Include manual intervention stamps and badge hashes. Access denied. On what basis? Request intersects noble privacy protocols. He set his forehead against the freezing conduit and closed his eyes. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. He opened them again and switched to the route he had hoped not to use, a layered maintenance query written to look like routine corrosion forecasting. It was legal enough to survive first-pass audits and dirty enough to reach where it needed. Data spilled onto his wrist in compressed blocks. Pressure dips coinciding with tribunal sync windows, camera outages aligned to legal archive transfers, and 3 badge hashes with partial masks. One belonged to a dead engineer. One belonged to a tribunal courier currently off ship. One resolved only to noble tier audit clearance with no name attached. He copied the packet into his wedge and nested it beneath a harmless invoice folder titled Coolant Gaskets. Recount. His brother had taught him that trick. Bury the truth inside boredom, and nobody with rank would read past line 2. When he backed out of the duct, his shoulder brushed a cable clamp and sent a tremor down the corridor plating. This time he heard movement in response. Magnetic boots, distant but real, crossing from tribunal wing toward C-spine in disciplined cadence. Not hunting noise. Procedure noise. Worse in its own way. He killed his wrist light and pressed into the hatch shadow while the boots drew nearer. Their rhythm came through the deck before the wearers appeared, and with it came clipped voices carrying legal language sharpened into weapons. Confirm lockdown sectors. Sir, through F maintenance spines sealed. Unauthorized archive ping originated in C-band. Detain any contract labor without escort. He felt his pulse hammer once, hard, then settle because he forced it to settle. Panic burned oxygen and judgment. He had neither to waste. 2 officers crossed the far junction in tribunal black, helm visors mirrored, rank bars bright as knife edges under the emergency blue. A drone floated behind them, projecting scan lattices that swept ankle height first, then chest height, searching for concealed drives and illegal transmitters. Sienna angled his body behind a coolant manifold and held still while the lattice passed over his boots, catching on the metal toe caps and moving on. Labor boots were invisible to systems designed by people who never looked down. The officer stopped at the pressure door that had locked behind him and keyed an override he had not been given. Hydraulic bolts withdrew with obedient grace. One officer glanced toward the hatch where he hid, nostrils flaring once in a species-specific tell he had learned to read as suspicion. Then the comm in her collar chirped, and she turned away. Proceed to nursery ward perimeter, the comm said. Heiress corridor remains private. His spine went rigid at the title. Heiress, private corridor. Restricted climate branch tampered from tribunal side. The pieces did not fit yet, but they touched. He waited until the magnetic boot cadence faded, then eased out and moved in the opposite direction, hugging maintenance shadows where decorative lighting never reached. The Valorum crown changed character deck by deck. In labor zones, everything smelled like grease, hot insulation and stale coffee recycled through tired filters. In noble transit arteries, the air carried resin incense and polished stone dust, curated scents designed to imply permanence. Even the hum of the ship shifted pitch, lower, smoother, as if wealth could purchase quieter machinery. Social rules posted themselves everywhere if you knew where to look. Bronze plaques with tiny script. Contract staff must yield right of way. Door frames with biometric readers set deliberately above average human eyeline. Emergency lockers coded to rank tiers, identical from outside, unequal by design inside. He mapped each one automatically the way some men counted stars. Not resentment, not anymore. Just survival geometry. A ping hit his wrist from dispatch at last. Q response to prior report, the synthetic voice said. Camera feed restored. No anomaly detected in C19. Please file maintenance closure. He stared at the message, then at the ghost heartbeat waveform still archived on his scanner. Closure denied. He whispered to nobody who could help. He sent back a formal note anyway, stripped of sarcasm so it would survive machine parsing. Thermal field interference caused biosign reflection. Life support sabotage, likely. Evidence logged locally. Request chained forensics. Dispatch answered in 12 seconds. Request received. Reassigned to tribunal review. Of course it was. He turned down a narrow connector toward his assigned locker bay, ducked under a hanging conduit bundle, and opened his chest pocket. The diagnostic wedge looked ordinary, scuffed and chipped, and smelling faintly of coolant. But inside, its dead memory partition, sat the hidden packet he had copied months ago from his brother's black box logs. He had sworn he would not touch it until he had corroboration. He had corroboration now. He keyed the private decrypt with the old family phrase his brother used to mock his seriousness. The file opened in fragments. Rescue coordinates, casualty lists, cargo manifests, then a redacted legal memo stamped acceptable logistical loss with 37 names erased and replaced by tonnage values. Human auxiliaries converted into freight math. He swallowed once and kept reading. Adjacent to the memo sat a dynastic audit signature that matched the microcrest sealant in the duct by 7 of 8 glyph strokes. Not proof for court. Enough for direction. He re-encrypted the packet, duplicated it across 2 maintenance chips, and slid one into the hem seam of his left sleeve, the other behind a loose panel in his tool harness. Physical evidence split in case one cache vanished. Procedure again. Always procedure. The corridor ahead narrowed, frost blooming along the right wall where a service hatch sat crooked in its frame, rimmed white and leaking thin threads of cold into noble air. He recognized the hatch from older schematics and from rumors traded over burnt cafeteria stew. Reliquary access beyond, ceremonial route, nobody in contract gray was supposed to know existed. The boot scuffs at its base were recent, too large for children, too light for armored guards, and patterned in a gait that started steady and broke every 6th step. He crouched, touched 2 fingers to the frost line, and felt vibration through the metal. Faint, irregular, unmistakably alive with machinery and someone else's breath moving beyond it. He looked down at his scanner. One clean heartbeat now, his own, because he had solved the ghost in C19. The silence beyond the hatch carried a different uncertainty, not technical, not yet social, poised between both. He rose slowly, rolled his sore shoulder once, and rested his palm on the manual release without triggering it, finishing one last breathing cycle before the next decision wrote itself into law, wages, and whatever remained of his brother's name. The manual release gave under his palm with a reluctant metallic sigh, and the hatch did not open so much as explode inward on a pressure gust that smelled of resin smoke, ionized steel, and predator musk warm enough to erase the corridor cold in one breath. Something hit him high on the chest, hard and precise, and he went backward into the opposite bulkhead, with his scanner clattering from his hand and skidding under a conduit bracket. A forearm, like braided cable, pinned him in place just below the collarbone, not crushing, just absolute, and a pair of ceremonial claw rings glinted at the edge of his vision, where emergency blue caught polished bone-white metal. He did not panic. Panic burned oxygen and judgment. He counted once through his teeth. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and turned his head enough to see who had him. Commander Harris Vareen Tal looked less like a person and more like a decision made by a warship. She stood nearly a full head above him, even with her knees bent for leverage. Silver fur patterned with darker storm stripes at throat and wrists, battle leathers fitted close over a frame built for acceleration and impact, insignia cords braided across one shoulder in the dynastic style he had only seen at distance during oath ceremonies. Her ears were angled forward in direct threat focus. Her pupils had narrowed to vertical slits in the low light. A scar crossed the bridge of her nose in a pale diagonal line that interrupted the symmetry just enough to make her beautiful in a way that felt unsafe. Her voice came clipped and level, military diction wrapped around a growl she'd not bothered to hide. Explain why a contract hull tech from Labor Registry carries encrypted archive keys reserved for dynastic auditors. Sienna kept his hands open where she could see them. One still rested against the hatch frame. The other hovered inches from his tool harness, close enough to look bad if she wanted it to look bad. I'd love to answer that in a format approved by legal, he said, breath steady on purpose. Can I get 1 centimeter of personal space first? Her forearm pressed a fraction harder. Not pain. Instruction. No. Behind her, the reliquary corridor stretched into darkness and red gold wall inlays, a ceremonial artery hidden inside maintenance geometry. He saw memorial alcoves sealed under transparent plating, old war pennants hanging in climate-still air, and floor mosaics depicting the founding houses in predatory profile. Every meter of it radiated rules not written for him. Contract grade did not belong here. Human boots did not touch this stone unless they were cleaning blood after somebody important made a point. His scanner vibrated weakly from somewhere under the conduit, forgotten, but still alive. One heartbeat now, his own. The ghost had gone. The threat in front of him had fur, rank bars, and very clear legal authority to ruin his life before shift end. At least tell me what I'm being charged with, he said. Possession of sealed keys. Unauthorized access near air corridors. Interference with restricted life support. Her nose twitched once, drawing scent data he could not control. And lying by omission. I haven't lied yet. You are late to it then. A soft chime sounded from her bracer display. She didn't look down. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, unblinking, as if she had trained herself not to yield visual dominance even to machine alerts. He registered details because details kept him alive. Tiny tremor in her left hand when she adjusted grip. A faint chemical note under her scent profile that matched neural suppressants from medbase stock, and heat radiating through leather at her forearm where it pinned him, several degrees above baseline, as if her system ran too hard and too hot all the time. At 0317 ship time, the Valorum Crown moved from emergency mode into tribunal lockdown phase, and the change announced itself through 3 descending tones, pulsing from hidden speakers. Vareen's ears flicked at the sound. You filed a sabotage request to dispatch. He exhaled once, slow. I filed a maintenance report with extra honesty. Dispatch reassigned it to tribunal review in record time. I'm touched. Do not perform humor with me, Technician Kim. Then don't ask me questions in a chokehold. Her mouth shifted at one corner, not quite a smile, more like her control slipped for half a second and showed teeth for a different reason. You repaired my nursery branch. There it was, direct and unadorned. Not seaward, not restricted atmospheric circuit. My nursery branch. He met her eyes and chose the truth that would not get children hurt. I repaired a failing line feeding a warm zone with small body thermal requirements. Labels were above my clearance. You bypassed protocol. Protocol had queue position 42. For the first time, she looked away, only for a beat, gaze sliding toward the memorial alcoves as if the carved names there might argue the point for her. When she looked back, the aggression in her posture had shifted from attack to test. Still dangerous, but with curiosity threaded through it. "Where did you get the key string?" she asked. He felt the chips in his sleeve and harness like they were burning through fabric. "From a dead man who trusted me." "Name?" "No." Her claws flexed against his jacket, puncturing outer weave without reaching skin. "You are under dynastic inquiry. And you're blocking a maintenance hatch in a corridor that doesn't exist on contract maps. We can both keep collecting violations until dawn." The line landed between them and held. She studied him long enough for the silence to become an instrument. Somewhere beyond the reliquary wall, distant machinery cycled, pumps thudding in patient sequence. The Ark's old bones never stopped talking. He listened automatically and caught another sound under it, faint at first, then clearer. Magnetic bootsteps, disciplined cadence, coming from tribunal wing and moving in this direction. Vereen heard it a breath earlier than he did. Her head turned slightly, ears canted back, pupils widening. Predatory focus became tactical computation in real time. "Tribunal patrol," she said. "Yeah, I gathered. If they find you here with archive keys, your contract dissolves before hearing. If they find you pinning labor staff in a hidden shrine, your public relations office dissolves before breakfast." That almost smile flickered again, sharper now. Bold for prey. "I bill extra for midnight improvisation." He expected another demand, maybe an order to surrender tools and kneel for scan. Instead, she released him in one smooth motion and stepped back just far enough to reassess angles. The relief in his chest came with a sting where circulation returned under the pressure point. He rolled his shoulder once and kept his hands visible because sudden movements around claws were for people with shorter life plans. She tilted her head toward his scanner under the conduit. "Retrieve it. Quietly." He crouched, slid 2 fingers into the gap and dragged the device free. The cracked screen threw green across his knuckles. He pocketed it and looked up to find her already moving, fast and silent despite her size, crossing to a bronze relief panel on the right wall, depicting a hunting scene he had taken for decoration. She pressed 2 claws into the carved eye sockets of a stone beast. Internal locks clicked. A seam opened beside the panel, revealing a narrow side passage lit by dim violet strips. He stared. "That's not on any schematic." "Many truths are not on your schematics." She glanced toward the approaching boots, now close enough that the deck carried their weight through his soles. "Decision, Kim. Stay and explain yourself to jurists who wrote your cast, or move." He hated being moved like a piece. He hated having no better option more. He stepped toward the hidden passage. She caught his sleeve before he could enter, claws hooking fabric with deliberate gentleness, and leaned close enough that he felt her breath at his ear, warm and edged with spice and suppressant bitterness. "If you run from me," she said quietly, "I will find you." He swallowed and answered with the same volume. "If this is recruitment, your onboarding script needs work. Go." He went. The passage bent immediately, taking them behind the memorial wall into a service artery, too elegant to be called maintenance, and too practical to be called ceremonial. Old alloy ribs arched overhead like the inside of a ship killer's throat. Thin conduits ran beneath transparent floor panels, carrying coolant that glowed a muted blue. Motion lights rose ahead of them and died behind them, with soft clicks erasing their trail in segments. Vereen moved at his shoulder now instead of in front, matching his pace without effort, one hand near her sidearm but not drawing it. Trust was not the word. Temporary alignment was closer. "Why help me?" he asked. She did not look at him. "I am not helping you. I am preserving options. Comforting. You restored heat to my younglings ward while unauthorized and unobserved. That act complicates your profile." "Your profile had me what exactly?" "A courier, a thief, a tribunal plant." Her gaze cut to him, assessing reaction. "Possibly all three." "Can't be all three, I'm overbooked." Behind them, a voice amplified by corridor acoustics barked an order. "Seal reliquary access. Scan for unauthorized biosigns." Another voice answered with code phrases he only half understood, the legal military dialect of people who had never patched a leaking coupler with numb hands at 3 a.m. Vereen touched a control node on the wall. A section of floor panel shifted, and a thin curtain of thermal noise spread across the passage like invisible fog. His scanner glitched in his pocket and then went still. "Mask field," she said. "It buys 90 seconds. "From what?" "From certainty." They rounded another bend and reached a junction where 3 corridors split, each marked by script bands and scent markers he could not decode. Vereen stopped so abruptly he nearly collided with her. She lifted one hand for silence. Her ears tracked left, then right, then centered. He heard nothing beyond machinery hum and his own breath. But he trusted the body language of predators. When they listened that hard, something warranted it. A small maintenance drone rolled out of the right corridor, squat and dented, carrying a stack of folded linen on its top tray, like a domestic servant lost in the wrong district. It paused, sensors whirring, then announced in cheerful neutral tone, "Attention. Corridor reservation in effect. Authorized persons only." Sienna blinked at it. "You're kidding." The drone scanned his badge and emitted a disappointed beep. "Contract laborer detected in restricted access. Please stand by for correctional escort." Vereen crouched in one fluid drop to put her face level with the drone's sensor cluster. "Override Tau Vereen Prime. Priority Ash." The drone's lights flashed red, then gold, then uncertain lavender. "Priority Ash accepted. Correctional escort canceled. Have a restorative cycle." It rolled away with its linen stack, muttering to itself in machine subroutines that sounded suspiciously like complaint. Sienna watched it disappear. "Your ship has very polite snitches." "Our ship," she corrected, then seemed to realize what she had said and flattened her expression back to command neutrality. He filed the word away where he kept dangerous data. The corridor lights flickered once, twice, then failed entirely. Darkness took the junction whole, not emergency dimming, not scheduled transition, hard cut, system level. In the black, he heard Vereen's breath sharpen and a tiny involuntary sound in her throat, almost a wince, forced silent. His own night vision lagged. He lifted his scanner for light and got only a dead screen. The mask field had fried his battery management for the moment. Then came the sound that mattered. Magnetic boots, much closer than they should have been, approaching from 2 directions now, converging. Vereen's hand found his wrist in the dark, claws flattening carefully against pulse point in the Alliance grip, used for oath-taking and battlefield extraction. Both. "Listen," she whispered, authority stripped to urgency. "When I move, you move with me. No debate." He could have argued. He could have asked who exactly was hunting whom inside a sealed noble corridor at third watch. He could have demanded guarantees that did not exist. Instead, he leaned close enough for her to hear him over the rising boot cadence and said, "If this is the deluxe hospitality package, I'm filing for a refund and maybe a blanket." Varine's grip tightened once on his wrist, a warning and a metronome. Then she moved, dragging him half a step left as a scan lattice hissed through the space where his torso had been. The beam painted the dark in pale grids, caught the edge of his tool harness, and ricocheted off her claw rings in brief silver flashes. Voices echoed at both corridor mouths, tribunal cadence clipped to doctrine, and she answered with a command tone so cold it could have frosted steel. "Hold position. AirS security transit. Eyes down." It worked for one heartbeat. Then a patrol officer said, "Code authentication." Varine did not hesitate. "Tau Varine Prime. Priority Ash. Audit contamination risk." A pause stretched, full of processing delay and institutional fear. Nobody wanted to challenge a noble directly. Nobody wanted to fail protocol in front of witnesses either. The boot steps resumed. Faster now, splitting to flank. Varine cursed under her breath in a language Sienna did not know and pulled him into the center corridor, her stride long and precise despite the blackout. He matched as best he could, shoulder-clipping wall plating, palms open to keep balance while he mapped by touch and sound. Another scan lattice spat across the passage behind them. "Left in 2, she whispered. He counted silently with his breath. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and turned with her into a narrow throat of passage where air went warm and wet all at once, heavy with sterilizer vapor and floral resin. A pressure membrane sealed behind them with a soft magnetic thump, cutting the boot noise to a muffled rumor. Emergency strips flared dim amber overhead, revealing a small anteroom lined with med cabinets, folded blankets, and stacked thermal cradles sized for children. Varine released his wrist and braced one hand on the wall. Up close, under steady light, her control looked expensive. Her shoulders were held too square. Her jaw was locked so tightly, the fur along her cheek twitched. Sweat had darkened the collar seam of her leathers despite the cold outside, and her pupils were blown wide now, not predatory focus, but overload. She pressed 2 fingers to a node at her throat where a dampener patch should have sat. Bare skin. No patch. "Door," she said, voice lower. "Manual deadlock, now." Sienna spun to the hatch wheel and cranked it clockwise until the internal bolt slammed home. The anteroom lights shifted from amber to muted blue privacy mode. A line of script pulsed over the inner door to the ward beyond. He couldn't read the language, but he recognized the icon beneath it. Neonatal life support. He turned back and found her still against the wall, breathing in sharp pulls that did not match the discipline she wore like armor. Her claws had extended without her seeming to notice, tips biting shallow grooves into alloy paneling. She saw him looking, flexed her hands once, and forced the claws to retract. "Don't mistake this," she said. "I am functional." Functional people don't carve bulkheads between sentences. Her ears flattened. Human humor again. Human observation. He took one cautious step closer, palms visible. "You took a suppressor?" 2 doses. Last cycle. "That long?" She gave a short nod. "I had hearings, then command drills, then nursery watch." By 0321 ship time, the Valorum crown had dropped into power conservation tier 2, and the change came as a low dimming hum through the deck, lights throttling to half and air circulation falling into uneven pulses. Sienna felt the shift through his boots and looked past her into the ward through the small inset window. 8 cradles glowed in a soft arc, each with thermal halos and biometric threads drifting above tiny sleeping forms bundled in station white wraps. Species mixed, from what he could see in profile. One with tufted ears, one smooth-skinned and blue-toned, one unmistakably human with a dark curl stuck to a damp forehead. Foundlings, wards, war orphans, whatever title bureaucracy had settled on this month. Vereen followed his gaze, and her expression changed by fractions. The commander vanished. The guardian remained. "They're asleep," she said, almost to herself. "Because you kept their heat line alive with no authorization?" she added, eyes cutting back to him. "Or because you were looking for leverage?" He could have lied cleanly. Instead, he shrugged one shoulder. "I was looking for a fault. Found children. Chose children." Something like pain crossed her face, quick and unguarded. "Do you know what statute governs those cradles?" "Not my rank." "Non-noble casualties from the Rift campaign cannot be entered into honor ledgers. Dependents can be housed, fed, trained, but not publicly named in mourning rolls. Grief is a privilege classed by bloodline." Her laugh came out thin and sharp. "They call it administrative clarity." Sienna stared at her, then at the sleeping row beyond the glass. "So the rumors about you going feral on patrol, ripping into staff, all that. Insomnia, sensory storms, combat empathic bleed from the campaign, improperly treated because treatment requires admitting what caused it." She tapped her chest once. "Every time the ship logs a child as logistical burden, I feel it like metal in marrow. The episodes get worse near tribunal sync windows. That's why Seaward dipped during archive transfers." "Yes." The word settled between them with the weight of a confession and a legal indictment at once. She pushed off the wall and moved toward a med locker, each step controlled by intention. Halfway there, her knees softened without warning. She caught herself on the cabinet edge, shoulders jerking as if a current had gone through her. A low sound escaped her throat, involuntary this time. Sienna closed distance and stopped at arm's length. "Vereen." "Don't touch me yet," she said, teeth clenched. "If the storm crests, my reflexes won't distinguish threat from aid." He nodded once. "Tell me what to do." That seemed to surprise her more than anything else in the corridor had. She swallowed, eyes unfocused for a beat, then pointed with 2 fingers toward the open med locker. Inside sat a scatter of empty injector sleeves, a cracked neural dampener cuff, and a compact field unit with its casing removed and components exposed in the way only desperate repairs looked. "Unit failed," she said. "I've been patching it between shifts. It won't hold calibration." He scanned the board by sight. Fried regulator, corroded contact bridge, 2 missing capacitors replaced with hand-soldered workarounds. Elegant, ugly, brave. "You did this yourself?" "I had no one cleared to trust." A tremor rippled from her shoulder down her arm hard enough to rattle the locker door. Her pupils constricted to pinpoints, then blew wide again. Sympathetic, nervous surge. Pre-seizure pattern, maybe empathic cascade if her condition matched what he'd seen in field hospitals after neural shock events. "I need that unit on the table," he said, "and permission to access your bracer telemetry." She bared teeth, not at him, at the sentence. "You ask like an officer." "I ask like a mechanic who doesn't want you on the floor." She held his gaze, weighing class, risk, and pride against the fact that her hands were shaking harder now. Then she unclipped the bracer and tossed it to him. "Temporary consent. Medical stabilization only." Accepted. He moved fast. He cleared the table with one sweep, set the dampener unit under the nearest task light, and snapped open his harness. Arc spanner, microtorch, diagnostic wedge, insulation tape, 2 spare flow capacitors rated for life support fans, 1 waveform filter meant for calm static suppression. Wrong parts, right principles. Neural dampening was signal management. Signal management was signal management. He plugged his wedge into her bracer first and pulled live readouts. Heart rate volatile. Cortisol spike. Limbic amplification off the chart. External triggers linked to proximate biosign distress. He glanced at the ward window and understood why nursery dips would hit her like a weapon. Vereen, I need your breathing with me. 4 count. She made a sound that might have been a laugh under strain. You command a commander now? Right now I command numbers, in for 4. She tried. The first cycle broke on count 2 when another spasm hit. The second got to 4 in, 3 hold, 4 out. Better. He stripped the failed regulator from the dampener board, burned away old solder, bridged the trace with filament from a cut sensor lead, then cannibalized 1 capacitor from his fan spare and seated it where the neural stage had room. Not spec. Stable enough if he could damp peaks without flattening her entirely. He wired the comm filter inline as a noise gate and set the wedge to generate counter phase pulses keyed to her bracer telemetry. Tell me when the wave builds, he said without looking up. It's already building. Scale 1 to 10. 8. He thumbed pulse amplitude down and frequency up, watching the waveform settle from jagged mountain teeth into uneven hills. Vereen gripped the table edge so hard her knuckles blanched under fur, then slowly loosened. Her breathing found rhythm in ugly increments. Outside the anteroom, heavy boots passed once, paused, passed again. No knock. Her priority ash lie still had teeth. Sienna didn't waste the reprieve. He took the cracked dampener cuff, stripped its strap, and repurposed the contact mesh into a palm patch. I'm going to place this at your sternum node, he said. You said don't touch without warning. Do it. He stepped in, set the patch where she indicated, and taped it down with quick, careful pressure. Her skin ran hot beneath his gloves. The moment contact settled, her shoulders jerked once, then dropped a fraction as the gate caught a spike and bled it off harmlessly into the circuit. Color returned to the edge of her muzzle. Her ears lifted from flattened to neutral. Status? He asked. She closed her eyes, tracked internal sensation, then opened them. 5. Descending. Good. Stay there. He kept one hand on the unit, tuning by feel and telemetry, while his mind split into concurrent checklists. Ward heat stable. Anteroom seal locked. Patrols passing every 90 seconds by acoustic estimate. Dampener output holding at 62%. His own pulse finally below panic threshold. When the next wave rose, she felt it early and wrote it with the count before he prompted her. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The ritual that had kept him alive in vacuum-scraped corridors now anchored a noble commander in a hidden nursery ward. The irony would have made him grin on any other night. 3 cycles later, her tremors had reduced to a faint residual vibration in the fingers. She flexed both hands, claws extending and retracting cleanly under conscious control. I can stand command posture again, she said. Don't. Sit first. A flash of rank offense crossed her face, then dissolved into weary compliance. She lowered herself onto a storage bench with a measured exhale. You issue unauthorized orders often? Only to people trying to collapse in front of me. She looked at the jury-rigged dampener on the table, then at his open harness and scorched fingertips. That assembly violates at least 12 medical protocols. 13 if someone is strict about tape color. Against all prevailing rumor, the sound she made was a quiet laugh rough-edged but real. It lasted 2 seconds and left her breathing easier. He used those 2 seconds to do what competence demanded next. Evidence discipline. He snapped high-resolution images of the failed original board, logged serial numbers, recorded her telemetry trend before and after intervention, and encrypted the file under dual signatures, his contract badge and her temporary medical consent token. Physical evidence, stored and time-stamped. No tribunal could dismiss it as labor gossip if chain of custody held. Vereen watched the process with narrowed eyes. You prepare records like someone expecting court. I prepare records like someone who has been called a liar by people with better uniforms. She accepted that with a slow nod. Then add this. She lifted her wrist, exposing an old service scar at the inner forearm, where a military implant port sat. Rift campaign empathic surge on set. Documented in theater, suppressed in official release by order of High Jurist Office. I retained copies in sealed command cache. Sienna met her gaze. You're giving me that? I am giving it to the forensic consultant who restored my ward heat, stabilized my condition, and did not ask for payment first. Her voice steadied into command, steel again, but the vulnerability remained underneath, no longer hidden, simply integrated. Do not confuse this with surrender, Kim. It is strategic trust. Best kind, he said softly. A tone chimed from the inner ward console. Not alarm. Temperature confirmation. Cradle ring holding at optimal range. Both of them looked through the window at the sleeping children and stood in the same silence for different reasons that were not so different anymore. Then Vereen rose, shoulders set, eyes clear, and extended her bracer for him to reattach like it was an oath object between equals rather than a rank marker between castes. Patrol pattern will rotate in 60 seconds, she said. When we open that door, you are no longer stray labor in restricted halls. You are under my direct forensic charter. Sienna locked the bracer onto her wrist, picked up the improvised dampener unit, and clipped it to her belt, where she could reach it without shame. Understood, Commander, he said. Point me at the next failure. Vereen did not answer at once. She keyed the anteroom seal with her bracer, waited for the lock to cycle green, then opened the inner door with a hand that had stopped shaking, but still carried the memory of it. Warm air folded over Sienna's face, layered with sterilizer, milk formula, machine oil from overworked cradle motors, and the sweet mineral scent of sleeping children. The nursery lights were low, constellations painted across the ceiling in muted blues and golds, while 8 thermal cradles pulsed in a quiet rhythm that matched no military tempo and every human one. Start with manifold 3, she said, voice back to command register, though softer at the edges. Its regulator hunts when the DAC load fluctuates. He moved to the indicated cradle bank and crouched, opening the service panel with 2 turns of his spanner. The regulator inside was old model, patched with care and desperation, exactly like the dampener she had been hiding in a locker. He adjusted the feedback screw by a quarter turn and watched the thermal graph smooth from jagged peaks to rounded waves. In the reflection on the panel, he saw Vereen step between 2 cradles and rest her claws on their rails, not gripping, just touching, like she was confirming they were still real. One cradle held a human infant with dark hair curling at the temple. Another held a small Valori child with silver ear tufts and a scarlet monitoring band around one wrist. None of them stirred. Sienna reseated the panel and stood. Manifold 3 is stable. You've been compensating by hand for weeks. For 4 cycles, she corrected. Night watch after command rotation. Tribunal denied requisition for full replacement. They approved a ceremonial fountain on deck 9 in the same vote. He snorted. Hydration by sculpture, strong governance. Her mouth shifted. That near smile he was starting to recognize. Your sarcasm survives stress better than most armor systems. It's cheap and field-tested. By 0324 ship time, the klaxons had stopped, but the silence that replaced them carried its own pressure, the kind that settled in institutions right before someone with rank decided where blame would live. A low chime came from the nursery console. Farine crossed to it, scanned the message, and angled the display so he could see. The report he had filed in C-19 was stamped in Tribunal Amber, incident classified as sensor reflection/operator error. Review closed. No forensic team. No chain audit. No follow-up. He let out a breath through his nose. There's your outcome. There is our outcome, she said, until we change who writes them. She touched two controls and split the display. On the right side appeared a sealed command cache index with her crest authorization. Hundreds of entries. Campaign logs, casualty extracts, med telemetry, legal correspondence, all nested behind military encryption. She selected one folder, hesitated, then looked at him. This archive can strip my commission if mishandled, she said. It can also verify your brother's packet, your duct images, and the suppression order attached to my condition. If I release it to dynastic channels, it disappears. If I release it to you, I violate 3 accords and every instruction my elders gave me about humans near succession law. Sienna met her gaze. Then keep it. I can work with what I already have. That is not caution. That is fear dressed as professionalism. He almost argued, then didn't. She was right and he disliked it. Farine stepped close enough that he caught the heat of her through fabric. In the nursery dim, her rank insignia looked less like decoration and more like weight. She took his wrist, turned it palm up, and pressed a slim memory sliver into the center of his hand. Her claws lay flat against his pulse, exactly as they had in the dark corridor. But now, the touch was deliberate rather than urgent, claim-shaped without being possession. Temporary dependency protocol, she said. Formal words in an old cadence. You hold this as my appointed forensic consultant under direct command protection. If challenged, you state my name before your own. He closed his fingers around the sliver. It was warm from her skin. That reads like trust. It reads like strategy, she said. Then, quieter. And trust. He nodded once. Accepted. A rustle came from the far cradle. The Valori child with silver tufts had woken and was staring at Farine with huge amber eyes, lower lip trembling in the prelude to a cry. Farine went to the cradle, and the transformation was immediate and startling. Her shoulders dropped, her voice shifted into a low humming language with rounded vowels, and the child settled before a sound fully formed. Sienna watched her adjust the blanket with claws that had pinned him to steel less than an hour ago. Precision carried across contexts. Protection was still protection. The child reached one tiny hand through the rail toward Sienna's sleeve seam, where he had hidden a data chip. He froze, then offered one gloved finger instead. The child gripped it, yawned, and drifted back down. Congratulations, Farine murmured without looking up. You've been approved by our most severe inspector. Does the inspector file reports? Relentlessly, in fluids. He smiled despite himself. I'll update my hazard pay request. She straightened and faced him fully. There is one more condition. If your evidence implicates my house, you do not soften it to protect me. That condition goes both ways, he said. If it implicates a human unit, you don't soften it to protect me. Agreed. They stood there, two people from opposite ends of alliance law, making a contract no statute had planned for, while cradle lights breathed around them. Sienna slid the memory sliver into a shielded slot inside his harness, separate from his brother's packet and the ducked images, then documented transfer on his wedge with dual signatures and a voice note in plain language. Physical evidence received, stored, witnessed. The ward door buzzer cut through the comm with a harsh two-tone burst. Varine's ears snapped toward it. Sienna looked to the console. External request. Tribunal security access. Priority legal. Not an emergency override, but close enough to smell the intent. She keyed audio only. State purpose. A filtered voice answered, crisp and public. By authority of High Jurist Office, produce contract technician Sienna Kim for custodial interview regarding falsified maintenance submissions, restricted entry trespass, and unlawful tampering with noble medical equipment. Sienna mouthed one word at her. Fast. She gave the smallest nod and switched to full command channel. Interview denied pending counsel and command review. Nursery deck remains under child rest protocol. The voice did not change. Refusal logged as obstruction. Secondary order incoming. Let them log, she said, and cut the channel. The next 30 seconds moved like practiced drill. Varine sent a silent ping to internal deck security loyal to command rather than tribunal, tagging location and child presence restrictions. Sienna duplicated the new cache sliver to a disposable maintenance chip, sealed the copy in a med supply pouch, and handed it to her. Redundancy, he said. She tucked it beneath a cradle access plate with one precise motion. Accepted. He transmitted his duct photos and regulator telemetry to two destinations, Maintenance Union Ombuds Node and Shipboard Safety Board Archive. Neither had authority to prosecute nobility, but both auto-logged submissions beyond tribunal deletion rights. External contact, outcome uncertain, trail established. The door buzzer hit again, longer this time, followed by a mechanical clunk as legal tools engaged the outer lock. Sienna exhaled and checked his ritual without thinking. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Varine saw him counting and matched him on the next cycle. When she spoke, her voice carried both steel and fatigue. If this becomes a floor confrontation, you do not step between me and armed officers. If this becomes a legal ambush, you do not step between me and my testimony. Her eyes narrowed, then warmed by a fraction. You negotiate with commanders like a dock worker. I am a dock worker. Not tonight. The outer lock released. 3 tribunal officers entered the anteroom in black armor with mirrored visors and scan batons lowered, but active. Behind them floated a legal drone projecting the High Jurist crest and recording from multiple angles. The lead officer looked at Sienna first, dismissal already loaded, then at Varine, where protocol forced his posture a degree more respectful. Commander Aris, he said, we are under directive to detain this laborer. Varine stepped forward until she occupied the center line between them and the nursery door, not blocking with aggression, blocking with rank. Directive conflicts with child rest restrictions and my forensic charter. The legal drone chirped. No forensic charter is registered to Technician Kim. Sienna reached slowly into his harness, removed the command sliver she had given him, and slotted it into the anteroom console. The display lit with her crest, biometric signature, timestamp, and active appointment order created 12 minutes earlier. The drone paused, processing. Charter, validated, status updated, protected consultant. The lead officer's jaw tightened behind his visor. Then, we request immediate seizure of his equipment for chain review. Sienna answered before Varine could. Already submitted. Safety Board and union ombuds have mirrored copies under automatic disclosure rules. Seizing my tools now only adds interference charges. The officer turned his helmet toward him, not liking laborers who understood procedure. You are very informed for contract class. Bureaucracy is a hobby where I come from. A second officer moved his scan baton toward the nursery threshold. Verine's claws extended with a soft, metallic whisper against her rings. "Do not cross that line," she said. Quiet. Absolute. Children are sleeping. Nobody moved for a breath that felt like a held blade. Then the legal drone pinged again. High Jurist Office issues amended instruction. Stand down from physical detention. Summons hearing at First Bell, Accord Chamber 3. Consultant Kim and Commander Iris Tal are ordered to appear with all referenced evidence. The lead officer lowered his baton. Frustration rolled off him like heat from a vent, but command law boxed him in. Acknowledged. He signaled withdrawal. The three officers backed out in disciplined steps, and the drone followed, still recording. The outer lock resealed with a hard, magnetic click that left the anteroom ringing. Silence returned in layers. First, no voices. Then, no bootsteps. Then, gradually, the nursery hum and the tiny sighs from sleeping cradles. Sienna let his shoulders drop. "Well, we got invited." Verine retracted her claws and leaned one hip against the console, eyes closing for half a second. "That was not an invitation." "True. Better snacks at invitations." She opened her eyes and gave him a look that carried exasperation, relief, and a thread of something he did not name. "First bell is in less than 2 hours. We need a coherent evidentiary framework, verified chain logs, and a stabilizer check on the tribunal chamber before we walk into their architecture." He blinked. "You think they'll hit life support again?" "I think systems fail in ways that flatter powerful people unless someone technical is already watching." He nodded, already reorganizing tasks in his head. "Then we watch first." Verine pushed off the console and extended her hand, palm up, command and partnership in the same gesture. "Forensic consultant Kim, stay under my line of sight until hearing." He put his hand against hers, wrist to wrist, alliance grip locking in with no audience this time. "Commander Tal, keep breathing on 4s when the noise spikes." Agreed. They broke contact, gathered tools and records, checked each cradle one more time, and stepped out of the nursery together into a corridor that smelled of resin, steel, and the opening moves of a legal war neither of them intended to lose. At First Bell, Accord Chamber 3 smelled like hot circuitry under perfume, a civic scent engineered to suggest order, while the deck vibrated with overtaxed systems. Sienna entered at Verine's shoulder in his contract gray jacket, scuffed boots cleaned but still honest, tool harness stripped to approved carry by 3 separate checkpoints. Tribunal black crowded the upper galleries. Maintenance crews watched from standing rail slots near the back, hands still stained with shift work. He recognized 2 nursery aides, 1 union rep with a broken nose he'd seen in dock canteens, and Officer Sire from C-19. The one who had paused, looked toward the hatch, and walked on when the comm chirped. The hearing clerk droned case identifiers. High Jurist Zorath sat at the central dais in layered sable robes, insignia heavy as armor, eyes flat, with the confidence of a man who believed process was a private weapon. His voice arrived polished. "Technician Sienna Kim is charged with falsifying maintenance claims, unlawful entry, and tampering with noble medical apparatus. Commander Harris Verine Tal is cited for procedural obstruction." Verine did not bow. "I contest framing and request integrated forensic review." Zorath spread his hands. "Granted, for efficiency." Efficiency, Sienna thought. was what powerful people called a narrowed lane. Before testimony began, the chamber lights dipped and surged. A low alarm muttered from somewhere beneath the floor, then silenced itself. Sienna felt it through his soles and turned his head toward the stabilizer status board on the side wall. One phase line flickered amber red for less than a second. Not random. Patterned. He leaned toward Vereen without taking his eyes off the board. They touched the chamber grid. Her ears angled once, then she spoke aloud in command. Cadence. Under Accord Safety Code, unstable tribunal infrastructure invalidates custodial rulings. I request immediate technical verification. Zorath's smile thinned. Denied. The fluctuation was cosmetic. Sienna took one breath on fours and raised his hand. Then, let the record show the presiding office denied a live safety check after visible phase jitter on line C. If this room drops pressure or power during testimony, that denial owns causality. Murmurs rolled through the labor gallery like weather over sheet metal. Zorath glanced toward the side clerk. 5-minute recess for optics. By the time the chamber clock marked 4 minutes, Sienna was under the dais catwalk with 2 court techs watching him like he might steal the floor. The stabilizer junction box carried a fresh tribunal-grade sealant bead. Too neat. Too recent. Stamped with the same 7 of 8 glyph drift he had photographed in C-Ward. He logged image, timestamp, witness, EDs. He popped the cover. Inside, a microfracture sat on the regulator coupler, cut to fail under peak load and trigger panic in exactly the way a hearing needed to dissolve itself. One court tech swore softly. That's deliberate. Yeah, Sienna said. Elegant too. Hate elegant sabotage. He replaced the coupler with sanctioned chamber stock under camera, mirrored the diagnostics to public display, and routed watchdog alerts to 3 independent nodes so no single office could mute them again. When he climbed back into the light, palms blackened and jaw set, even the aristocrat benches had gone quiet. Testimony opened with chain custody. He submitted every physical item in order, no flourish. The C-19 thermal waveform proving the second heartbeat had been field reflection, not fabricated panic. The duct images of tribunal-grade sealant on life support lines. The removed couplers from nursery and chamber, bagged and tagged. His brother's black box packet, decrypted in court with hash verification. The chip from his sleeve seam and the duplicate from his harness panel, both matching. Vereen's command cache sliver from his protected slot and the duplicate she had hidden beneath a cradle plate retrieved by nursery aid witness under sealed escort. The improvised dampener logs with her consent token. Nothing vanished. Nothing misplaced. Zorath tried to cut him off at the brother's file. Hearsay from a dead auxiliary, Sienna answered evenly. Corroborated by your office signature drift, by badge hash reuse, and by dispatch closure anomalies. He tapped the display. Bring in maintenance AI and dispatch logs. The chamber AI rendered as text and voice, painfully literal, and therefore hard to bully. It recited his original C-19 call, Q position 42, camera outage during tribunal reroute, his sabotage request, and dispatch's closure as operator error. Then it recited the line that shifted the room. Closure override originated from high jurist auxiliary terminal, not dispatch triage. Zorath snapped, machine misattribution. Then compare hashes, Vereen said. They did. The dead engineer badge hash had been replayed from jurist office credentials. The courier listed off-ship had transmitted through a legal drone relay physically docked in Zorath's private corridor. The unknown noble audit signature resolved when cross-keyed against chamber maintenance authorizations. High jurist Zorath. Sole match. Officer Surrett was called next. His loaded look from C-19 finally paid its debt. He stood rigid and admitted he had seen tribunal officers at the reliquary lock before official authorization, had started to report it, then received a direct command to reroute toward nursery perimeter and hold silence under legal privilege. "I obeyed," he said, voice rough. "I should not have." The Union Ombuds node appeared by secure channel and confirmed receipt time of Sienna's mirrored files before detention was attempted. The safety board confirmed identical timestamps and no post-submission edits. External contacts resolved in public, dismissive where expected, decisive where needed. By mid-session, Zorath's composure had cracked into contempt. He stood, robes hissing over stone. Even if procedural faults occurred, none of this alters Statute 9 Delta. Humans remain ineligible for noble title, command adjacency, or dynastic claim. This laborer cannot be elevated by emotional theater. Vereen crossed the floor before anyone could interject. She stopped at Sienna's side, turned her left hand palm down, and laid her claws flat against his wrist in sovereign claim, the gesture old as Alliance war oaths. The chamber inhaled as one organism. Her voice carried to every tier. Then hear law from the burden side of rank. This man restored heat to children my statutes classify as manageable liabilities. He stabilized my war injury when your office buried its cause. He preserved evidence when your systems erased it. If nobility is duty under risk, he has met the threshold repeatedly, while bloodline officers failed it by design. I petition lawful marriage under command right and emergency constitutional review of 9 Delta. Zorath barked. Emergency succession protocol voids any cross-caste union under active inquiry. Sienna finally stepped forward. Only if the presiding jurist is uncontested. You're contested, and your own sabotage triggered the review. Your protocol just voided itself. Silence snapped, then broke into argument across benches and feeds. The senior accord arbiter, an elder with half her face mapped in old campaign scars, struck the gavel once. Order. Findings first. Findings came hard and public. Sabotage, proven. Evidence suppression, proven. Fraudulent casualty, reclassification under acceptable logistical loss, proven. Medical harm by administrative denial, proven. High Jurist Zorath was stripped of office on the floor, insignia removed by court-martial hands that did not tremble. Null rank cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, matte and final. He was marched out through the same doors laborers used for disciplinary exits. He did not look back. The arbiter turned to the statute board. Motion to suspend 9 Delta pending constitutional amendment. Hands rose across species lines, hesitant from some, immediate from others, enough to pass suspension. Then came amendment debate in open chamber, while feeds stayed live. It lasted 92 minutes, brutal in language and meticulous in scope. Merit criteria replaced bloodline exclusivity for defined civic peerage. Cross-species marriage protections were codified. Command conflict checks were tightened, so no jurist could bear maintenance risk under privacy shields again. When the final vote locked green, Sienna felt the chamber's pressure change in a way no vent system could explain. Their marriage was performed that same cycle under emergency civic authority, not in silk halls, but on the tribunal floor, still smelling faintly of ozone and solder. 2 witnesses came from rank. 2 came from labor. The union rep with the broken nose signed with stained fingers. The nursery aide who had retrieved the hidden duplicate chip signed next, chin high. Vereen spoke her vows like a contract she intended to honor in bad weather. Sienna spoke his like a maintenance standard, specific, tested, built to hold load. The arbiter sealed it. By accord, revision recognized. Late in station day, after filings and debriefs and the strange numbness that followed institutional earthquakes, they returned to Seaward. The rebuilt nursery deck hummed clean. New manifold housing sat where patched regulators had been. The improvised dampener unit, now replaced by sanctioned medgear, rested in a sealed evidence case marked Review Complete. Return Authorized. Sienna signed it over to Med Engineering for training use. No hero relics, just better procedures. He also closed the last threads because unfinished threads became future failures. The chipped diagnostic wedge carrying his brother's packet went to certified archive with duplicate keys held by Union and Accord Court. The sleeve chip and harness chip were logged as merged evidence, then retired. The maintenance AI's odd contain multitudes subroutine was flagged, audited, and formally commended for emergency discretion. The polite snitch drone from the reliquary junction got a firmware update and, according to the tech note, became less enthusiastic about correctional escort. Sienna approved that line with a tired grin. Under the constellation lights, the human infant with the dark curl slept with one fist open. The Valori child with silver tufts watched Sienna and demanded his finger again, Inspector still relentless. Varine stood close enough that his sleeve brushed her knuckles, not claiming, not hiding. Consort Engineer Kim, she said, trying the new title like a tool balance test. How does it fit? Like borrowed formal wear, he said. But I can move in it. Her laugh was quiet and real. Good. We have work. He looked over the cradles, the new sensors, the law display on the wall where 9 Delta now appeared in red strikeout and amendment text glowed beneath it. What kind of realm are we building then? Varine rested her palm against his wrist, pulse to pulse, and looked at the sleeping children before answering. One where care counts as power, she said, and where nobody gets filed as cargo again. He nodded, and for the first time since C-19 went dark, his breathing found 4 counts without effort.